Now let us look in the Hebrew to just get an idea for certain, to lay the foundation that we know when Yom Kippur is. Now in the Hebrew, we see in the very first part of the scriptures, it says, Ba'asor l'chodesh hashabe'i hazeh Yom HaKippurim. Ba'asor means literally in the 10th, l'chodesh, of the month. And that word chodesh, as we learned already, is interchangeable with yereach, which is the literal spelling for the word yarach, which is moon. They are interchangeable. The whole concept throughout the scriptures, there are many examples. And also the word chodesh means a renewal. It means the rebuilding. So it is literally the first point of light that hits the moon in its cycle when it begins to wax into the actual full moon. So when we see that first piece of the moon, each and every night, the moon will get a little bigger until it becomes full. And then it will begin to wane. And then it will go away completely. And this is during the end of the month. But when the light returns to the moon, this is always the beginning point. This is always number one. And you can see the idea of one in the sky. You can count it. It's a piece. It's one piece that has returned to the moon cycle. We've covered this in great detail. But here we see it says literally, Ba'asar l'chodesh, in the 10th of the chodesh, of the monthly cycle. So the 10th day, not quite a full moon, but getting close. Hashabe'i, of the 7th, Hazeh, of this, is Yom HaKippurim, the day of Kippurim, the day of the atonements, the day of the coverings. And further we see, a little further down in the scriptures, it says, B'tesha l'chodesh, ba'ereb me'ereb ad ereb. Tishabetu Shabbatakem, which translates B'tesha, in the 9th, l'chodesh, of the monthly cycle, Ba'ereb, in the evening, Ma'ereb, from evening, Ad Ereb, unto evening, Tishabetu, you celebrate, you observe, Shabbatakem, your Sabbath, your Sabbath. But what does it say? It says, Ba'ereb, in the evening. Me'ereb ad ereb, from evening unto evening. You celebrate your Sabbath. Now the word ereb in Hebrew literally means a mixture. It refers to the time when the sun sets and you begin to see those beautiful reds and yellows and blues over on the western sky. And there is a mixture clearly seen in the western sky of the night coming into being and the final lights of the sun going away. And this is about 15 minutes from this point is when the first stars in the Shemayim in the sky will be seen. And so it is during this time period, this is called Ereb, when the sun sets and we see these beautiful colors, this period of time that is preparing for the time when the stars are seen, and they ultimately are the witnesses, they establish the matter. When this happens, from this evening, this point in time, to the next evening, at the same time, you celebrate your Sabbath. Now, traditionally, Yom Kippur is observed for 25 hours. The reason being, and it is legitimate, that one would not want to end the fast too soon as to say that we are just ready to be done afflicting ourselves before Yahuwah Elohim. So therefore, an additional span of time is done. There's no harm in this. It would be better to extend the time than to shorten the time for sure. Because Yahuwah says that the being who does not afflict himself on Yom HaKippurim will be cut off. So therefore, an additional amount of time is usually observed for Yom HaKippurim, because it is, again, the most Kodesh time. But the scriptures literally say from evening to evening, you observe your Sabbath. You observe this time of the affliction, the time of Yom HaKippurim. So literally, we know when it is, because Yahuwah wanted to reiterate the idea of Yom, because remember, that word day has to also mean from evening to evening a 24 cycle, because Yom Kippur is called the day, Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonements. Some naysayers who say, well, you can't possibly know when the feasts are, and how could you know for sure? Well, it's in the scriptures. Yahuwah did not give us a book that is too far for us. It says right in the scriptures that this word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart to perform it. It should not be too difficult for us. So we can understand what Yahuwah said, because it tells us literally when it shall be. From evening to evening, me'ereb ad ereb, you shall observe your Sabbath. Tishabetu shabbatekem. Okay, so now we need to look at this word for afflict. Because if you look up the word afflict, it is literally pronounced in its normal form. It's just bare root form as ana. And ana, it not only means to afflict, but it literally means also to humble oneself. And I believe that this is very important in the application of how we are to afflict our beings according to the scriptures. We are to humble ourselves. That's the entire point. Because in the Hebrew, it literally says, Wa'enitem et nefeshtechem. Wa'enitem means, and you afflict. Comes from ana. The techem on the end literally just means, and you. So wa'enitem et, which is the place designated, also means aleph and ta, first and last, a picture of the Messiah, according to the scriptures itself, the aleph and the ta. But it says, Wa'enitem et nefeshtechem. Nefesh literally means your being, or it has been translated your soul. That word actually comes from solstice and solar, all these different words which imply something to do with the sun. So it does have some pagan connotation, but just to make it simple for people who don't know all that and just have to understand what I'm speaking in English here, we have to clarify that this word is often translated as soul. Because of the fact that it is the essence, it is not just the body. The nefesh can refer to the body, but it also refers to the bare emotions of the person, what it is that makes up the person. Now, there are other ideas for the word, for the spirit and all these different things, the ruach and then the neshama, all these different forms. And I don't have time to go into that right now. It's a very fascinating topic, but for right now, I just want you to focus on what it says. You are to afflict your being, and that is not just your body, but it also has to do with your emotions and all these different things that make up the bare minimal you, who you are. And everybody and even animals have a nefesh. But the scriptures also say that the nefesh is in the blood. The nefesh is in the blood. So that's going to be important throughout this teaching as well. But what I want you to see is it says, Wa'enitem et nefeshtechem, and you shall afflict your beings. Again, that word enitem comes from ana, which is the word for afflict that we see in the passage when we continue to read it over and over and over. Yahuwah says, and you shall afflict your beings. So it's very important. So let us understand through the scriptures themselves what that means, because there are many interpretations today. A lot of people have said that it means various things. They have, there's all types of ideas about this, but the scriptures themselves, they always speak for themselves. It doesn't require me. It does not require, anyone necessarily. Yahuwah's word speaks for itself. So let it speak for itself and go to Ezra, chapter 8, verse 21. It says, then proclaimed a fast there at the river of Ahawah, to humble ourselves before our Elohim, to seek from him the right way for us and our little ones and all our possessions. So here Ezra speaks very highly of the idea of fasting, which is the word som in Hebrew, som. And som, he says that they humbled themselves. It says, I proclaimed a fast. He proclaimed a som here at the river of Ahawah to humble ourselves. That is the word ana. It's the same. It comes from the same root, ana. And it means literally to afflict and to humble. Remember I said earlier, that word afflict can also mean humble. So when you see that word there, just know that in the Hebrew, what you're not seeing is that this is literally telling us how to afflict our beings. Because Ezra, we all know, was a man of Yahuwah that is undisputable. Undisputable. And what he says here is that he did this, he fasted, which means to go without bread and sometimes to go without water. It just depends on the type of fast. Oftentimes, for sure, during Yom Kippur, most go without food and water, but some just go without food. Some, have a hard time with that, so they have to have maybe a little something, but they still afflict themselves. They're fasting. They're not going through all the motions. They're not, decorating the body and focused on vanity and focused on the flesh and focused on feeding the body and all these things. They're focused on Yahuwah. They're focused on His judgment. They're focused on the fact of how solemn and important this time, this one moment in history is. It's so important. So they focus on that. And so therefore, he said that he did this to humble himself before Elohim, to seek from Him the right way. So through humbling ourselves, through affliction, through anah, we can find the right way. And through fasting, we can find the right way, according to Ezra. To seek from Him the right way for us and our little ones and all our possessions. And be assured that Yahuwah showed them the right way. He didn't say, hey guys, what are you fasting for? Why are you, no, he didn't say. So we have to take scripture in the entirety of the context, because we're going to get to a verse in a moment that's going to, some people use to try to say, well, you shouldn't fast. Yom Kippur has nothing to do with not eating. That's a ritual of man. That's some type of tradition of man. People have different theories out there, but we know what the Hebrew is teaching. We can go there, we can look at it for ourselves, and that's what the purpose of this teaching is, to go there and to look at it for ourselves. Let's go to Psalm, Tehillim, chapter 35, verse 13. It says, but I, now this is David speaking now, when they were sick, put on sackcloth. I humbled my being with fastings, and my prayer would return to my own bosom. Now, in the Hebrew, in the Ivrit, it reads, initi, which comes from anah, initi, basom. So, I humbled myself, basom, in fasting, nefeshi, my being. I humbled myself from fasting, my being. And what are we trying to do again? We are trying to initi, our nefesh. I'm trying to afflict my nefesh. Initi, that's what he did. He afflicted his flesh. And it comes from anah. So how did he do it? Again, he did it through fasting. That word is psalm. He did the fasting to afflict the flesh. So it's very clear. It's not very difficult to understand that yes, when the scriptures say to afflict the being, it is saying to fast. It is telling you to fast. Anyone who says that fasting is not profitable has not read the scriptures, brothers and sisters, because fasting is important from the very beginning of scripture to the very end of scripture. I mean, there are many, many, many examples, so I am just trying to narrow them down to the ones that literally give you an explanation that says specifically by men of Yahuwah, not from myself, or traditions of other men, but rather from the men of Yahuwah recorded in the scriptures, that they associate the idea of afflicting their beings, using that same word that Yahuwah says that you shall do. They always tie that into the concept of fasting. And we know that David was a man after Yahuwah's own heart. That came from Yahuwah's mouth. He said that about David, so we should take his words into special consideration concerning this matter. Now let's go to the famous passage. Many of you may not be familiar with it, but it is a very famous passage that many bring up when the concept of fasting comes about. And it is important, and I want to give it what it deserves, because it deserves to be explained in an important way, to look at all the aspects. But it's Isaiah, Yashayahu, chapter 58, and we're going to start in verse 3. It says, they say we have fasted. And that word is samenu. That comes from Psalm. It's just the menu on the end just really refers to the fact that it says we. So samenu means we fasted. Okay, so we fasted. And you have not seen. Why have we afflicted our beings? And there's inenu, nefeshnu. Inenu comes from anah. The nu on the end just means we. So we afflicted. Nefeshnu, our nefesh, our beings. We afflicted our beings. Same terminology that we see for Yom Kippur. Yahuwah says, you shall afflict your being. So, in a way, we're going to see that this is actually referring to the Yom Kippur fast in a moment. But not only that, but we're going to see the importance of fasting and what Yahuwah says about it. Because it says, and you took no note. So wait a minute. Fasting is supposed to be important. We read a minute ago in Ezra, it says that they humbled themselves with fasting so that they could hear the right way from Yahuwah. But now we're reading that in Yeshayahu's time, Isaiah's time, that they fasted and Yahuwah did not take note. Now why is that? It says, look in the day of your fasting. In the day of your fasting. In the yom of your fasting, brothers and sisters. It's the yom of the fasting. So literally, the reason this is important is because there's one day of fasting, that's Yom Kippur. That's what Yahuwah is actually talking about. But let's just say it's just talking about any day that you fast. Because, some people may have a problem with interpreting it that way, but we know through context that's what it is referring to. But it says the day of your fasting, you find pleasure. This is saying that they're seeking after their own desires. That's the reason Yahuwah did not hear them when they fasted. And it says, and you drive on all your labors. Now, why would that be important? If you're fasting, why can't you labor? Because on Yom Kippur, the day of your fast, brothers and sisters, you are not supposed to labor. It says no work shall be done. So again, this is yet another witness that this is talking about the Yom Kippur fast. But anyway, let's continue on in verse 4. It says, look, you fast for strife and contention, and to strike with the fist of wrongness. You do not fast as you do this day, to make your voice heard on high. So here we see Yahuwah says that they're not truly fasting, because if they were fasting, then their voice would be heard on high. You have to follow this because this is really important. If you fast, he will hear you, but he has a problem if you're pursuing your own works and your own labors on Yom Kippur. He's not going to hear you. And if you're fasting just for contention and for strife, to prove somehow that you are superior in some way to others, to use this as a mechanism for division, for agitation, for foolishness, for things that should not be, then Yahuwah has a problem with it. And even though it sounds kind of crazy, why would one fast for strife? Why would they do that? Oh, believe me, people do all types of things when it comes to the scriptures to try to create strife. It is so abundant in these last days. There's so many people who just want to be contentious. They want to create strife. And they will use certain ceremonies like the Yom Kippur fast as a point for strife and division, for chaos. So Yahuwah has a problem with that, brothers and sisters. He's got a major problem with fasting just for the show of it. It says, this is what Yahuwah says. It is a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his being. Is this a fast I've chosen? A day for a man to afflict his being? Well, yes, Yahuwah called for a fast. He called for the afflicting of the beings. There's several scriptures that actually say to proclaim a fast in the scriptures over and over and over. I don't have time to go into all of them. Hopefully you can remember a few. Maybe it sounds familiar because it's all throughout the scriptures. But it says, is it a fast that I've chosen, a day for a man to afflict his being? Is it to bow down his head like a bulrush and to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Do you call this a fast and an acceptable day to Yahuwah? Well, in the context, actually, one would consider it a fast and one would consider it acceptable to Yahuwah. Now, understand what I mean by this, because he's going to tell you why it's not acceptable in just a minute. But the reason I want to highlight it is let's just remember Nineveh. It's called Nineveh. When Jonah, who is called Jonah, when he went there and he preached in the entire land of that pagan city. If you research ancient Nineveh, they were so pagan, so disgusting.